Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CompTIA's Trend Watch, where we bring you a little bit of this and a little bit of that from the technology industry and the data that we're collecting on the research team. I'm Seth Robinson, and today we're going to be talking more about artificial intelligence. Specifically, we're going to look at the challenges that businesses are facing and some of the skills that they're trying to build around AI. Obviously, AI is something that everyone's been looking at. It seems to be this powerful new tool that can bring a lot of benefits. But the more that we use the technology, as with any technology trend, we start to understand more and more about the challenges that come with it. So we've collected some data around the way that companies are approaching AI in these early stages of generative AI and kind of the middle stages of using a lot of these different types of algorithms. And companies are starting to see four big challenges, kind of working from the bottom up here. The number 4 challenge is around the data that they have to collect and that they have to use to train these AI programs. We've already seen companies struggling a little bit with data as they were trying to do data analytics or as they were trying to use big data. A lot of companies had their data in silos across very many different departments. And so they need to collect all of that data together. It needs to be clean. It needs to be properly managed and then fed into these AI systems. And you also have to watch out for any kind of bias that might be in that data that's been collected, just because of the way that the company has been doing its operations in the past. There could be some things in there that you would want to watch out for. So companies have a lot of challenges in collecting and classifying and then using their data as input into these AI programs. The next challenge up the list, about 45% of companies say that they're really concerned with cybersecurity. I think that we've seen this kind of growing over time since cloud computing, where a lot of companies went into cloud computing trying to get the benefits, and then they assumed that they would think about cybersecurity after the fact. We're seeing more companies recognize that they need to think about cybersecurity and privacy and things like that at the point that they're adopting a new technology, that the new technology is going to open new vulnerabilities. And so their old defenses, their old techniques and strategies probably aren't going to work as well. And there's a lot to be concerned about when it comes to AI and how cyber criminals might be using it. Moving up the ladder one more time, we get to the cost of infrastructure as the number 2 challenge that companies are thinking about. And this is something that we hear about quite a bit with these new technologies like blockchain or now artificial intelligence. The companies that are really on the leading edge of this and providing it maybe in a consumer fashion are really relying on significant infrastructure in order to make their products work. And that isn't going to scale out to every company. Obviously, the technology is going to improve. The costs are going to come down. But we're talking about pretty significant investments in order to have your own artificial intelligence, or maybe even in order to leverage somebody else's, if they're kind of passing some of those costs on to you. So infrastructure doesn't seem like a thing that companies need to think about all that much. We tend to think about infrastructure as being stable, and a lot of companies have the amount of compute resources that they need. But as they're moving into these new trends, that doesn't come for free, and they have to think about the cost of those things. The final challenge, I think, is a pretty interesting one. The previous 3 were all technology related. And this final challenge, the top challenge that companies are saying that they anticipate, is the balance between AI algorithms and technology and the human component. How do these two things work together? I think we tend to think about this in terms of how many jobs is AI going to disrupt or do away with. And I think that companies in general, they obviously want to cut their costs, but they also want to make their workforce as productive as possible. And if they can make their workforce that much more productive, then maybe it is a good idea for them to invest in even more workforce at that greater rate of productivity. So I think companies are really focused on trying to figure out this balance between technology and human workers, whether we're talking about AI or anything else, but especially now that we're talking about a technology that can mimic human decisions, that can mimic human output. So companies are really focused on that. And I think that is going to be a really interesting angle for technology leaders and HR leaders and business leaders over the next decade, probably. So that leads into the skills that companies are looking for. And I think we see skills and the technology realm across all four of our major areas: infrastructure, software development, data, cybersecurity. It tends to be weighted towards data and cybersecurity. And I think that makes sense. These are newer areas, and companies are wanting to use newer technology to gain even more competitive advantage. So we talked about data being a major challenge. We talked about cybersecurity being a major challenge. And companies are going to be looking for skills in those areas around this technology, along with many other things that these specialists might already do. In order to get these skills in, we see companies pursuing a relatively balanced blend of upskilling and reskilling and hiring. So it could be upskilling a cybersecurity professional to include AI in their repertoire. It could be changing one professional, whether in the technology or the business side, into someone that is focused a little bit more on a new technology trend. Or it could be hiring a specialist from the outside. Even though we're talking about new skills, companies aren't always expecting to get these skills from the outside, so they're expecting to use that blend. And then the final thing that we see is that with this being a new foundational technology that's going to be embedded in a lot of different solutions, companies believe that they need foundational education and knowledge across their entire workforce. And so I think that will be an interesting thing to watch as companies are trying to build the technical acumen of their overall workforce. Because so many employees are using technology these days, how does AI get in there, and which pieces of AI are important to talk about with individual job roles? So that's a quick look, I think, at the challenges and the skills that companies are facing and the skills that they're trying to build moving into the future. And we hope you'll join us next time on Trend Watch.